Great. Good morning, and thanks, Simon. It's a pleasure to be here. As Simon said, my name is Colm Lyon. I'm the CEO and the founder today of Pay with Fire, our fire financial services, which I'll tell you a little bit about at the end. Up until last March, I was the CEO of RealX Payments, which is a company that we founded back in 2000, and we sold RealX Payments last year to an American multinational called Global Payments. I'm involved with the FinTech and Payments Association of Ireland, and I sit also on a public sector committee or a government committee for the International Financial Services Strategy for Ireland, trying to make sure that the integration between the private sector and the public sector in the area of FinTech and payments is all, if you like, appropriate, and that the right minds and ears are listening to what industry needs with regard to changes in any of the public sector policies that would impact the industry. So what I thought I'd do today is, rather than me telling you what I think, because sometimes when you get into the position that I'm in, people ask you things, and really it's not what I have to say I think that's really important, but really what people have said to me. So what I was going to do was tell you about 3 people who I've met over the course of my 15 years in running my own business and growing my own business, and the impact that those people had on me, and how they got me maybe to change my perspective or to change my mind with regard to the things that I was doing and the influence that they had on me. So when I was a young guy, I've got 5 brothers, and the usual kind of growing up family, and then you've got, I think there was 5 of us born in 6 years, so that I was squashed in the middle there, right? So the only way that we were ever going to get money was by doing something. So you get up in the morning and we would deliver newspapers around Clontarf. And my eldest brother, because he was the eldest, he owned the different roads, right? And then he would lease them to me. And then if I got more houses on the road to take the newspapers in the morning, then I would make the full margin from those houses, because the lease was and then I learned a lesson: landlords are bastards, right? That was my first big lesson, right? And when he's your brother, he's even worse, right? And so from a young stage, I was always like this idea, like that if you did get up early in the morning, and if you were willing to do something like that, you could make more money. And if you could grow that business and get more people, and if you got like 4 or 5 houses in a row taking newspapers, that this was really good, because you could hop across the fences. You didn't need to go back out, right? So you could make yourself really efficient as well. So you start learning about economies of scale and stuff like that at 16, and it's really nice. And then one day I was going around, and I knocked at the door. Actually, I watched the program the other night about PJ Mara. Do you remember? I don't know if you saw it on RTE. So PJ Mara was one of our customers in this newspaper round. And he used to ring at 7 o'clock in the morning if we didn't have the newspapers in his house at his door. And he'd go, "Where are my newspapers?" And so we had to go around always. There was a certain route that you took on the newspaper round, but we always had to go to PJ's house first. Right, give him his newspapers, because he needed to know what was in the newspapers, and then we go back and start around again. But there was another guy who I wanted to tell you about called John Teeling, and you may know John Teeling, his name. John is a businessman. He's at the time he was both a businessman and an academic in UCD as well, and he was living around the corner. And I called in one day to collect the newspaper money. John took the Times and the Independent, because he was one of those good houses, and he said to me, "So how did the Leaving Cert go?" Well, not too good, really. And his wife, Deirdre, was a career guidance counsellor, and he called her, "Deirdre, look at that." Oh, right. And the problem was I hadn't actually matriculated, so I didn't actually get the points to get into college, right? So no matter what I scored. And so this was a problem. And he said, "You need to go back and you need to do the Leaving Cert again. You understand that?" And I said, "I don't know." He said, "Yeah, you do." He said, "And we're going to pick out the subjects for you now. Right, you're going to do business, you're going to do business organization, you're going to do accounting, you're going to do economics. How many honors do you need to get into commerce these days, Deirdre?" 4. Oh, Jesus. Art. He said, "Can you draw?" "That's fine, you're sorted." And they were the 4 subjects I did, and I got 4 C's the following year and got in to do the commerce. Just in time management, I don't know what it is, but nonetheless, John was incredible at being able to read me as a very young guy. Right? He could look at me and he could tell me about myself, things that I would only realize maybe years later. And all the time then, when I was in college, he'd give me a lift home, and he'd turn on the radio and he'd be listening to the shares. He'd be talking about the different shares in the Irish stock market at the time. He was rating different companies at the time and having great fun. And I'd be sitting there taking copious notes, like trying to see, what are you doing? What are you doing? And back in those days, of course, then we had a little fund, and he introduced us to some stockbrokers, and a load of us in college clubbed together, and we started buying the shares. And John would come in and he'd say, right, I'm going to do a low risk, a medium risk, and a high risk portfolio. And every year out in UCD, he did this. And he put them up on the board, and every week he would trade the shares in those low, medium, and high risk portfolios. And at the end of the term, the low risk guy would make 5%, the medium risk guy 10%, and the high risk guy 20, 30%, right? And he explained the linkage between the return and the risk, and how volatility increases and so on. And everybody was just, amazed with this teaching that he did at the time. And then, of course, he went into the exam paper, and it was, what's the function of the board of directors? He never fucking taught us that, So anyway, that was a problem, because he had to read the book as well, which I forgot. But he was, when I was 38 then, 36 actually, I went over to him and I said, I want to leave my job, and I want to set up a company. And after 14 years or 12 years, I want to leave and I want to do this business. And he said, what age are you? I said, I'm 36. And is this your first idea? Yeah. I'll see you in 2 years' time when you're on your third idea. I think, what a wanker. That's a stupid thing to say, because this is a brilliant idea. This is my dream come true. And of course, I went back 2 years later with the third idea, which was Relax Payments. So again, he was able to tell me about myself before I could actually discover it for myself. And so when I went to selling the business last year, I did call him up as well. And, John, we're thinking of selling Relax Payments, and that was an easier discussion. You'd be a gobshite if you don't, I think was what he basically said. So that made it perfectly clear. But if I was summing him up, I would say that the one thing that he always taught me, there's a wonderful video of him. It's done by UCD, and they're interviewing him about being in business. And the interviewer asks him about failure. And, what about failure? And he almost looks a bit puzzled when he's asked the question, and he kind of says, what do you mean, But that's just getting it wrong. And it's the manner in which he just completely and utterly never thinks about the problem of getting something wrong. And it was never an issue for him. And that was something that he taught me right from the word go, getting things wrong, failing the leaving cert, whatever it was, none of it matters. It's only the choices that you make going forward that really matter, and the decisions that you make now that matter. And it's not what you've done. And so he still is a great friend, and it's wonderful to be in touch with a guy like that throughout your whole life, because you can kind of come and go, and when you meet up with him, it's really, really good. When we started the company and we started to grow, like many businesses, you get that initial spurt, and then it kind of slows down a bit. And it happens in many, many companies. Those curves that academics and people will draw, and they'll kind of say, you reach point A, but getting to point B, which you have to get to if you want to go to C, and point B is kind of slow. And a business will, sometimes it'll get that initial boost. All the early adopters will come in, the enthusiasm's there, we get the first customers up and running, but then we enter into this things start to slow down. We start talking about internal things rather than external things. We start thinking about, a great friend of mine said to me one day, in business, you're either making the shit or you're selling the shit. Or if you're not doing one of those two things, you're what we call an overhead. Right? And be very careful, right? Because that's what you want to be. You're making stuff and you're selling stuff. And that's what you've got to focus on. And what happens is an organization sometimes gets to this point where it realizes that it needs some of this administration, it needs some of this. And that happened to us, and I was kind of stuck, because even though we were growing every year as a business by 6, 7, 10% year on year, which, some would say wasn't bad, I was terribly dissatisfied with that. And this second guy I want to tell you about is a guy called Frank Berardi. Frank was a coach, an executive coach. Now, my reaction to coaching was, this is nonsense. Me sitting down and telling you something about myself, it doesn't make any sense. But Frank was an Italian New Yorker. He was retired, and he started every conversation with, what are you having to drink? Because we'll have a cocktail first, and then we'll get in and we'll have a discussion about what you want to do with your business. And he said to me, you must be unhappy with something. And I said, I'm really unhappy with the growth. I just don't get that we're growing so slowly. We need to be growing more quickly. And I really don't know how to get my head around all this. And I'd been to Stanford, And I got bamboozled with all these words like visions and missions and values and strategy and objectives and goals, and they were all mixed up in a big blur. And I said, I need a way to be able to write this down, and a way to be able to get people to join in this journey with me, and to be able to kind of say, right, we buy this, we're going to go for this. Because if we keep growing at the rate that we're going to be overtaken. This company isn't going to work. And so Frank, there was this great expression throughout that year. It was about an 18-month period that I worked with him. And he would have said to me, are there things that you want to change? And I said, well, one of the big things I have to change is my ability to be able to give constructive feedback to people. We're very good when you do a good job at telling you, you've done a great job. Now, when things aren't working out, we're not so good at telling people they've done a bad job, or that the job hasn't met our expectations. We tend to avoid those conversations. I certainly did. And so Frank said, great, now I've got something to work on with you, because we can work on this. And he taught me about this evidence-based management, these evidence-based conversations. He taught me how not to cross the net, how not to personalize things, how to make sure that when you're talking to somebody that every conversation is good or constructive but never bad. And it's some of those techniques, which I still have in my head and are still really active for me, were absolutely amazing. And he through that program, he talked a lot about strategy, and same with the classroom stuff that I did as well, was a lot about strategy. And then towards the middle of the program, this little guy walks in and he said, now you've all learnt about strategy, let me tell you about culture. And he used the expression that culture ate strategy for breakfast. And he tried to talk to us through and talk to us about how the organization needed to behave and how people within that organization needed to behave. So if you want to grow this company, and if you want to scale this company, it is no longer just about what you do, but it's also about how you do it. And you have to define that behavior that you want in the organization. And so we went about these offsites, and we went about these discussions that we never had before. And he said, and I want to remind you of your issue with regard to constructive feedback, and when you make sure that the people on your team, he said, have you ever heard of a Russian lunch? I went, no. He said, a Russian lunch is when you take a member of the management team out for lunch, but just you go back to the office. He said, do you have any lined up this week? Well, no. Oh, well, he said, maybe next week. So you have to, and that's not being nasty, that's being real, that's being absolutely clear. And what we found was, out of the blue, people on that team who up until that point in time had never told me what they wanted from their own ambitious perspective. And I remember very well one guy coming up to me and saying, I don't want to work for a company turning over 4 or 5 million. I want to work for a company turning over 20, 30 million. And it came out of the blue, and because I was now having conversations about people and their alignment to the vision of the organization. And it was a breath of fresh air. And what we did at the end of that, I think we finished that in, it was 2010, and then we grew we went from, I think it was 8 million in revenue, the next year to 14 million in revenue, and the next year to 18, right? So from 9 to 14 to 18 million, almost doubled the business by 100% in 3 years, right? And it was just incredible. And the feeling and the atmosphere and just the whole belief that people had, that we set a goal which was way beyond, the ambition that we had before. And if there was one remarkable lesson with Frank, it was that, like, when you're sitting down to plan the vision and to plan the journey for your organization, everybody, not everybody, but a lot of people start sometimes with, well, where are we today? And he said, don't start there. Start off with, where do we want to be? Do not let where you are constrain the dream or constrain the vision in some way, or constrain the ambition. Don't say, well, what's the growth for next year? Well, what did we grow at last year? Don't have that conversation. Just say, I want this business to be doubled in size in 18 months. And that's what we did. We set the vision out that we wanted to grow by 100% in 18 months, which was complete nonsense, because nothing that we had would have told us that that was a realistic goal. But yet we did it within 2 years, because we didn't constrain ourselves with where we were. And that was one of the big lessons for Frank, was that thinking about the future in terms of where you want to be and not where you are. And the other thing, that the big lesson from him, was this idea of making sure that you have conversations in the organization about the way in which people behave and the way that what are not their personal values, right? So it's not about personally what you value, but do you behave in a manner that's consistent with the achievement of this company's goals? And are you aligned with the vision in this organization? Do you share the same ambition? Do you have the same passion? Are you driven in the same way as everybody else in this team? Because if you are, that works. And the last guy, this is a bit odd, this one. He's a poet, a philosopher, a historian, and really, if I was alive 2,000 years ago, I think he's probably Jesus Christ. But his name is David Whyte. You may or may not know of him. David Whyte is, I meet him down in the Byrne College of Art, and I have a great affiliation to the Byrne and to the location and the people down there, and I spend a lot of time there, and I work down there sometimes. And David was running this program with a fellow called Martin Hayes. Martin is an Irish fiddle player. Martin is a phenomenal guy as well. Martin has thousands and thousands of songs in his head. He doesn't read music. Do you do the dots? I don't read the dots, he says. But I'll have songs and I'll have music. And David and Martin, at the time that we were being presented with will we do the deal, will we not do the deal? So when we went out to raise money for Relax and for Fire to try and grow the business. And in that process, we were presented with an opportunity to sell Relax and to keep Fire, right? But that wasn't what the intention was when we started that particular project. So what we did was we said, right, we will look at, this option. But there was a decision to be made, and that was the key point. The decision had to be made. Will you, after 15 years, sell this business or not? And I made the decision down in the Byrne that I would. And it was David, and I don't really have the time because I just got the 5-minute warning here, but the journey that David took us through was phenomenal in terms of the talent that the guy has, and Martin as well. And basically the essence of what they were teaching and what they taught me was conversational leadership and the art of conversational leadership. The ability to invite people into a conversation, the ability to listen to that conversation, and the ability to be able to, as he said, stop doing what you're doing. And the biggest favor that you can do yourself is to learn to stop. And then he'd say, no, I mean actually stop. Really stop. And he said, most people will never stop doing certain things because they're afraid of this vulnerability, this zone that they enter, which prohibits them from stopping. But stopping, in fact, he said, is the way to, rebirth and the way to rebuild what it is that you want to try to do. And I'll finish up with Martin. Martin told us an amazing story then about sometimes Colm, he plays the fiddle, as I said, and sometimes when I'm playing the music and we're all there together, and it's not great. It's like we're just not there. So I've learned sometimes I can lean over now to the baron player and I can give him a nod or a wink, and I can invite him into the conversation with the fiddle. I can do that now. I can do something. I can play a trill. I can do a note. I can do a cut. I can do something, and I'll bring him in. And then I'll look at the guitar player and the whistle player, and I'll do the same thing. And when we together are having the same conversation, the music sounds so much better. I remember thinking, that's brilliant. Like, that's what you want with your management team. Right? That's what you want. Everybody aligned towards that same wonderful music that you want to play. And that was Martin and David. And I stood at the crossroads in Ballyvaughan, the T-junction, after being in Auckland, sampling their great whiskey and coming out and saying to David, I've made my decision. Thank you. We're going to sell this business. And it's time to enter into this zone of vulnerability, if you like, and to move on. And it was a fantastic experience. And what it goes to show is that if you're willing to listen to people, I would certainly be, I think, a good listener. I always engage with people, always talk to people, always try to learn from their experiences. Be they young, be they old, be they from anywhere, it doesn't matter. You get this huge wealth of knowledge built up and this huge understanding, and then you try to apply it yourself, and you can see how all of that makes sense. We're in a really good position right now where we've Fire Financial Services, which is just underway. We've just launched the beta account for businesses, and we've got nearly several hundred, I think nearly 350 businesses now up and running on which is going to be a fully fledged alternative to a bank account. So we're going to offer onto the UK and the Irish market now by the end of the year, we'll be fully live with an alternative to your bank account, which is for the first time for a non-bank, if you like, to enter into this market. We call it a payment account because it's not a bank. But nonetheless, it'll have all the features plus a whole lot more that you would expect from a regular bank account, which is a wonderful opportunity, and we've got a great team set up doing that. I'm also involved in some with an investment fund, and we've got 2 or 3 now investments under our belt, and that's also really, it's absolutely amazing to meet people who've got such passion about their businesses and such enthusiasm, and it's a real pleasure from our perspective to help them now and to kind of work with them as they want to scale their businesses as well. So I wish everybody all the success in your ventures and in your journeys, and you know, don't be afraid to stop when you want to move ahead. All right, thanks very much.